Yeah, before we get started tonight, we have a few announcements as always. Sorry for the late start. Rob made me wait on two people from Almeida, and I'll be damned if we're going to spend any more time on people from Almeida. So, cheers are you. With that seconded, I believe we have one announcement that I know of thus far from Mr. Calvin Black. If you'd like to come up to the front and make your announcement.
Hello. So, I have a matter to discuss with you all, which I think would be best described as being a mild irritation. A bit of background information which will become obvious quite relevant in just a moment. I graduated in July from my undergraduate course in mathematics. My course finished last semester, and I plan to graduate in the winter, but I deferred it because everybody says a summer graduate with nicer photos and all that. And I have been officially offered a place in my master's course for next year. This is the letter, in case anybody doesn't believe me in about 30 seconds time. But so part of this is, by definition, from the beginning of the next academic year, I will be a student. Unfortunately, about a week and a half ago, some forces within the union, that's as much as I'll say that, have begun attempting to invalidate my election win. Huzzah! Now, nobody panic. Look at my face. I am not concerned about this at all. As far as we can tell, which is basically a few people's personal grievance with me, because I will explain. This has no legs to stand on. So the accusation is basically that, as of the time of the election of the AGM, I was not eligible to stand because I wasn't a student. Now, first of all, that's at best technically correct, because, as I said, I haven't graduated yet. But it's also irrelevant, because whenever this came to light, I and some of the current council members had a look through the SU Constitution, and there is in fact no rule regarding candidacy and eligibility for candidates with regards to elections. What they appear to be doing is misinterpreting a rule that says, in order to hold an executive position on a society committee, you must be a student. Now, first of all, obviously, Ben is still president, so not breaking any rules. And also, by definition, because I would be graduating in July and not be re-enrolling until September, October, I can't be a student in the summer months. So this is basically blatantly discriminatory against master's students. Mm-hmm. But besides that, two rules down, it's also kind of using because it says the terms for the term lengths for committee terms. Such redundancy, wow. Will be set by the society themselves. There is no rule saying that terms have to start and finish in June. So, this is what's going to happen. The current plan is for myself and some of our heavy hitters, Ben, Rob, Lily, etc., Chris, probably because Chris is looking to pick a fight with the union, which is the best kind of person to have on your side in this situation. We're going to basically go over the person's head and speak to Niall McKenna about this and see if we can convince them of this nonsense, because the actual point of this rule is that they don't want non-Queen students being executive committee members, which whilst I don't necessarily agree with, I understand at least, but it's also pointless because, as I said, by definition, for the entirety of the next academic year, I'm going to be a student. Truth be told, we don't expect Niall McKenna to play ball, as he and I have had a few run-ins in the past. So what is most likely going to happen is that, and this is not to be repeated outside of this room,
it's being recorded. It's being recorded on live stream. Except for all you people on the internet. Keep it stum, please.
My evil plans thwarted by my own creation. Basically, if the SU wants to hold an EGM, they are not forcing us to hold it this side of summer, thank heavens. So we're going to basically stop them. If they say, no, sorry, we're not convinced by arrogance, Calvin cannot be president, what's going to happen is I'm going to resign. Peter Beck is going to become interim president, wink wink, and then we're going to ignore them. Basically, Peter Beck will be president on paper and nothing else. He will continue on his role as secretary, I will be president. And hopefully they'll forget about this throughout the course of the summer, and whenever I am properly re-enrolled, I'll just sign up. If they force us to hold an EGM, After the summer, we will basically just say, okay, right, well, the union is making us do this. I was duly elected, they're being jerks. Are we all happy with you remaining on? And that should be fine. And if for some bizarre reason they force us to hold an EGM like the week before or during the exams, Matthew Bradley, the hero of the AGM, has kindly agreed to represent proxy. But again, this is not an issue at all. This is the union this is a guy with a month left on his term looking to flex his muscles, as I believe somebody said earlier. Nothing to worry about, we just want to inform you all. So, like I said, the two most likely things are we're going to try and convince them it's not necessary, but if they say no, Calvin, then we're just going to tell them what they want to hear, basically, and continue on as we do by just ignoring them. Because it's also worth pointing out that
Don't touch the mic.
we broke loads of their rules during our AGM. And also,
No.
it'll be fine, you can just literally kick up it. And also, just for one example, this is just to prove that this is their issue, not ours. This is an incredibly selective enforcement of their rules. One of their rules in the ancient constitution is all society AGMs must be held no later than April 1st, unless you get permission from them. Ours was held, but also, for example, the players, the acting society, and the physical and applied math society just came through, still haven't held their AGMs. The Dragon Slayers AGM is hilarious. It's flipped, it disregards so many union rules, it's quite a separate whole. So, yeah, this is just nonsense, basically, that I'm not concerned about. No one on the incoming or outgoing council is concerned about, so you don't need to be worried about it. The only thing is just that it means I can't sign up the finance office, but to spend money you need 2 signatories, and we have Peter and we have John, so I don't even need to. So, does anybody have any questions, any concerns they'd like to raise? Anything at all? No? Go ahead.
I'd like to propose a motion that we build our own students' union with blackjack and hookers.
I like the reference. I couldn't knowingly second a motion involving the illicit sex workers, but nice idea. Might be trying to do that, but let's not tell about that yet. Yes. Anything else? We're all.
In fact, to speak in support of that motion.
That's it.
It's actually 2 years older than the Students' Union. So it is the original union of Queens. In fact, if anyone's been to the archives, you'll find letters from the council sending letters to the university complaining about the lack of browning in the library, or students wearing their gowns in the improper manner while on campus.
Yeah.
I haven't even continued that actually, actually.
Yes. Yeah, so it's really, like I said, not our problem there, so it's nothing to be concerned about. So that is all. Anything you are concerned, come talk to me after.
A round of applause, please.
Yes, exactly.
The black letter of the law. And with that, yes, we'll get on to the reading of the minutes of the last debate, which this house supports the opening of injection centres for drug addicts.
Sorry, what did you just say?
I said this house. We're going to read the minutes of the last that we had, the Dufferin Award, which was held before Easter. Sorry, the motion being this house supports the opening of drug injection centres.
Stop backseat president.
Here. Drug use. Yes.
Same robes, sure.
I'm currently waiting on 2 friends from Ballymena. So if you see 2 suspicious characters walking through the doorway at any point, I'm on my floor. The annual Dufferin competition for Speaker of the Year at the Literary and Scientific Society took place on the 6th of April 2014. I've written here for some reason. 2017. I'm living in the past. By 1,300 members. Before the debate began, President Murphy allowed time for honorary life memberships for the 168th session of the proposed House. Mr. Calvin Black nominated Mr. Chris Spratt, seconded by Morgan Hickman, among others. Mr. Chris Spratt nominated Mr. Robert Whitehurst, seconded by Harry Adair, among others. Thank you. And finally, Mr. Jamie Cogwell nominated Ms. Lily Bear, seconded by Chris Spratt, among others. The President's questions are heard from Ms. Ciara Campbell, who asked the President what he enjoyed for breakfast that morning. Mr. Murphy revealed that he enjoyed a croissant from Cafe Nero, the symbol of rampant capitalism, commercialisation and tax avoidance. Ben Murphy is here every Thursday. My favourite joke I've done. Without further ado, President Murphy then announced the evening's motion. This House will introduce supervised injecting centres for drug addicts. Opening the case for the proposition was Mr. Peter Beck. He defined an injecting centre as an environment where individuals over the age of 18 would be allowed to take their own drugs in a safe area using sterile equipment provided to them. He stated that we can't deny these people the help that they need, namely providing a way to stop addicts injecting on the streets where the danger of drug taking is increased 100-fold. He claimed that these centres would take the excitement out of taking drugs and would protect wider society. Opening the case for the opposition was Mr. John Nicolinen. He asserted that the motion didn't go far enough, claiming that sterile needles can only go so far if the drugs that addicts are bringing in are dirty to begin with. Instead, introducing these centres will only lead to fighting organised crime, the normalisation of heroin and the promotion of drug use. Continuing with the proposition was Mr. Matthew Soldo. He claimed that the opposition were underestimating just how important clean and sterile equipment is in reducing the harm caused by drugs. Mr. Sullivan claimed that such provisions would dramatically reduce the number of new HIV and hepatitis C cases in the UK, and that being in an environment where trained medical professionals would all but eliminate any chance of overdose. Continuing with the opposition was Mr. Hugh Dolan. He put it to the House that injecting centres would merely provide the illusion of addressing the core issue. He claimed that drug addicts are more often than not alone and frightened of seeking help, meaning that those who need the most won't utilise these centres. He also claimed that those who are willing to seek clean ways of using, pharmacies already offer sterile needle exchanges, meaning there is little need to invest money in new injecting centre initiative. Speaking thoroughly for the proposition was Mr. Shane Glasgow. He asked the opposition to step out of a comic book world where the criminal underworld will somehow be dealt with by some external factor. He said that we as a civil, we are a social, and we are a societal and civic responsibility to draw a line in the sand and at least try to address some of the enormous problems of drug addiction in the UK. Injecting centres may not be the be-all and end-all of drug problems, but is a start and will go some way to tackling organised crime. Next up, the opposition was Dr. Craig Miller, who lamented the fact that he didn't have a medical textbook to hand to throw the general direction of the proposition. He stated that opening centres would indeed have a small effect, but at the end of the day, the number of heroin users in the UK would remain the same. Asserting that this is what we should really be tackling. He claimed that money would be better spent on more liaison psychiatrists to stop individuals with mental health issues turning to drugs such as heroin. Concluding the case for the proposition was Mr. Conor O'Neill. He addressed the concerns earlier raised by the opposition with regard to addicts overdosing intentionally within these centres, claiming that there would be professionals on hand as well as laws against non-resuscitation requests. He asserted that the first step to getting individuals clean is talking to professionals in a controlled environment, before closing with his now customary John Stuart Mill quote. Concluding the opposition and some of the debate with Mr. Conor Ardle. He came straight out and admitted that he wanted to be funny this evening, but the debate made him far too angry to do so. He criticised the proposition narrative that just because they wish to do something, they were the de facto winners in the debate. Mr. Arnold claimed that argument only holds up if that said something is in any way beneficial to society. He brought forward the safety paradox where addicts are more likely to overdose if they feel they have a safety net to fall back on, before claiming that the proposition's argument had more problems than a literary collection. That was his joke. Questions were heard from Liam Mackle, Peter Gunn, and Liam Mackle again. While the judges convened, a vote based on stage performance was taken, which read 6 ayes, 20 nays, and 5 abstentions. After much deliberation, the judges stated that the winner of the Dufferin Award for Speaker of the Year for the 168th session will be awarded to Dr. Craig Miller. May I take the minister ready?
Very quickly, because I realise we're running out of time, I'm going to take one item of private members' business this evening. So if anyone has anything on matters to cover the last 4 weeks, because nothing's happened in that time. Anything at all? Mr. Black.
This probably should have gone on announcements, but I didn't want to bore you.
For God's sake, it's not private members.
It is private announcements. It is private announcements. I assure you. It could fit in either. 2 quick things I want to bring to your attention. those of you who are aware of the Chris is going to sigh at this very hard ignore the Dragon Slayers. No, it's very strange of you.
I'm just ignoring you at this point, to be honest.
Thank you. The Gaming Society of Queens, they hold a giant gaming and anime convention every year called QCon. They have offered to hold a joint event with us at the bit at QCon. If anybody's interested in speaking at that, it will be end of June. You will probably get a guest pass for just one day, so that's an incentive. The motion hasn't been set yet, but probably doing something on minds up. This house, please, the book is better than the film. Something like that. So, pardon?
My first bit.
And anyway, that's one thing, and the other thing is just that, can I bring up the mock election bit? It's just gauge interest.
Yes, I suppose.
A snap election is called, if you haven't heard. And we normally have a mock election bit. An election is called, obviously, exams right around the corner and all that. So it may not be worth the hassle to organise it because people may not plan. But we did have an EU referendum debate last year, beginning of June. So it can work. So I'm just curious, quick short hands, who would be interested in either attending or speaking at a mock United Kingdom Party election debate in the first week of June?
Yeah.
Fair number of people? Okay. Then it will be looked into. It will be the first special meeting of the 169th session, which is why I'm bringing that. So, good. Okay, I'll do it. Thank you.
Given those are technically 2 notions, I will allow one item of private business. Mr. Spratt.
I would like to ask the House what they make of the French election. Shall neoliberalism triumph against fascism? Shall the EU be saved by this glorious former banker Emmanuel Macron? Emmanuel?
Don't look at me, Emmanuel.
Macron. Big Macron.
Are there things you get in coffee shops?
Aye, big Macron. Aye. Macaroon.
Yes, Ms. Campbell.
I hope one day to have as big an ego as a politician to create my own
Is this a personal
what do you call this campaign with my own initials as Emmanuel Macron did with En Marche. It was needed.
It's good.
Very well.
Wonderful.
Does anyone have any other reflections or thoughts on that? I didn't say.
I'm just really looking forward to it. And stop pretending to care about the French.
But that's fair.
They're possible. I'll probably have to be German.
Anybody else? Mr. White?
Yeah, I enjoyed the style of debate. We have a fairly benign, it's just like a panel almost of individual speakers are kind of serial debates, but they were facing each other in a very, and they had clocks in front of them, like some strange crystal maze round.
Yeah.
It was really, really intense. And I think we should. Yeah. It was really intense. I love that.
You've already spoken to Lou. Yes, so does anybody else have any thoughts on that? You've already spoken as well. Somebody else who hasn't spoken yet. Anybody else at all? Alright, Mr. Sprouted.
I would like to contest that point, Mr. Finbar Rogers, that the French, unless they elect the fascists, are a fine bunch of lads. With great wine, great food, decent cities. I contest, sir, that it is very much worth caring about the French.
That technically a new item of business. It was about the election. Whether we care about the French or not is entirely.
I mean, if you like the EU, like the French, even they were German for a while.
There's no point care about them in 1750 years.
Mr. Beck. Stand up and read your voice.
It's really on Chris's point, so it might be circular. And that Mr. Spratt is right that France has its qualities, however, the art, the cities, the food are all fantastic, but the fact that it is ruined by the French people.
We have strayed quite far away from the topic that was the election. I feel like we're just taking pot shots. Easy though it is to take pot shots with French, we're not going to do that. And I'm going to move swiftly onwards to private business. 2, which is President's Questions. Does anybody have any questions for me? If you have questions about the French, I'm not going to answer them. Monsieur,
What did you think about Petit Déjeuner?
that's breakfast. I had Cocoa Pops because I hadn't had Cocoa Pops in ages, and I really like Cocoa Pops, so I bought the box specifically for this session. So yeah. Any other questions? No. Yes, fine.
What's up with your colour?
You know what's up with my mom?
It's got a different colour on it.
It's fine. It's fine. It's lovely.
High society here. You know you don't know about that. Anything else? No? Moving swiftly on. Sweet. I'll move on to the next debate. That being, this House believes that all nationalism leads to xenophobia, and I welcome to the floor to speak. First for the proposition, Ms. Schieffer-Dixon.
It is my job this evening to dissect this motion and distill the essence of what it is asking. We will be arguing 3 main points. Firstly, I will discuss the nature of nationalism, how and why it has been used to construct a sense of common identity based on the production of a presumed other. Secondly, I will look at the very etymology of the word xenophobia, discussing how the construction of said other leads to fear and hatred. Thirdly, I will distinguish nationalism from patriotism, showing how nationalism is a politicisation of a common culture. Nationalism is a way to divide, and it is a way to unite. The very essence of nationalism is based on the sense of the other. It is a phenomenon used to arbitrarily delineate communities. Nationalism creates an artificial binary on the basis of claimed differences. It posits that certain groups are irrevocably linked by common bonds. It involves a commitment to a collective whole on the basis of common ethnicity, culture, history, language and values, drawing distinctions between groups of people and drawing lines across time. This may be deconstructed. Deconstruction theory suggests that we can only understand something by knowing its opposite. For example, black and white, inside and out, identity and difference. There can be no one without the other. In this sense, nationalism sets up arbitrary lines of difference and implies a homogeneity of denizens within one nation. If nationalism is dependent on a foreign and feared other, then by definition, it is based on xenophobia. Xeno is a Greek term meaning stranger or foreigner. By telling us that we are different, we come to believe that we have more in common with those of a certain ethnicity or linguistic background than other humans. Nationalism is not an organic phenomenon which emerges naturally. Ernest Gardner said, "It is nationalism which engenders nations and not the other way around." Nationalism is an artificial construct designed to promote a cohesive society as a means of uniting disparate communities into a greater whole.
On that point, Mark.
No. It has been an instrument of state policy in Western countries since the dawn of the 18th century. Nationalism supports the status quo and is used as an instrument of governments to produce a malleable, easily governable people. It implicitly suggests, as the nation is understood against its other, that the state will protect its nationals and their interests against potentially dangerous or inferior other nations. This provides a clear raison d'etat. It is governance on the basis of division. As Spencer and Warman wrote in 1997, nationalism is an ideology which imagines the community in a particular way as national, asserts the primacy of this collective identity over others, and seeks political power in its name. Nationalism is the politicisation of a common cultural identity. It is the projection of a common set of values and history onto the collective political plane. Nationalists seek governance based on ethnographic considerations rather than universalism. A nation only exists in the vacuum of the other. It is identity on the basis of otherization. Nationalism creates an imagined community, replacing the individual sense of self with a greater sense of purpose and being. It merges the individual into a greater entity, removing the universality of the human condition. Yes.
May you please define universalism for us?
Universalism is the idea that every human being is an individual and they themselves define themselves. They are not defined by being put into categories of I belong to this nation, I have this sexuality, I am this colour. And it means it assumes an impartiality and an equalism of every single entity who lives in the world. The construction of the the nation is based on the construction of the other. They intrinsically linked, and the nation itself could not be understood without contrasting one common cultural grouping against another. The other is a prerequisite for a nation. The nation would not exist sine qua non, a notion of a different, implicitly inferior other. I would like to look at the deeper meaning of the word xenophobia. The word derives from ancient Greek, a composite of a sternum and ending. Xeno means foreign or alien. Where it gets interesting is with the connotations of phobia. While it has now come to mean hatred, in the ancient Greek it in fact refers, quite interchangeably, to either fear or hatred. This implies that we are hateful of the things which we fear, but we are suspicious of that which we do not understand. Nationalism calcifies and perpetuates this notion. By drawing daily distinctions between communities, it sets up for us this story of mutual incomprehension, and as a result, mistrust, fear, and hatred. Lastly, I will distinguish nationalism from patriotism, showing how nationalism extends and politicises the feeling of common cultural values. Patriotism is an emotional attachment to one's homeland. It reflects a loyalty and identification with a set of commonalities, including history, language, culture, and ethnicity. Nationalism is a politicisation of this and seeking political determination on the basis of ethnicity or common history. It mandates political action as it posits that only those of your nation can truly understand you or protect your interests. Nationalism entails exceptionalism, which is echoed in claims of being a chosen people, claims of superiority, and desires to not only liberate one's own nation, but also by extension subjugating others where opportunity allows. I have shown that, definitionally, all nationalism does lead to xenophobia, as one cannot hold the nation to be excellent without the otherization of all other groups. It removes the individual and creates a collective. It removes solidarity and creates division. I hope you will vote overwhelmingly for this motion and against this deep division which is entailed by the binary discourse of nationalism. Instead, be a citizen of the world, our true nationality.
And with that, to welcome, to open the case for the opposition, I welcome Mr. Ryan.
Good evening, honourable members of the House. I confess that I have yet to speak in a debate that is as clear-cut and dry as this one that we're having tonight. As the motion, all nationalism leads to xenophobia, is blatantly false. But before we begin, allow me to boil down the proposition's motion to its logical components. The motion dictates that all forms of nationalism, xenophobia, for all forms of nationalism, xenophobia, defined as fear and hatred of strangers or foreigners, or of anything that is strange or foreign, is the inevitable result. The logic of this being, A implies B, so that for all instances of A being true, B must also be true. This makes our job a lot easier, as all the opposition has to do is debunk this motion, is demonstrate only a single form of nationalism, whereas xenophobia, or xenophobia's fundamental requirements, cannot be attributed to the nationalism itself. In other words, if A is true, but B is false, then the statement is false. The proposition has clearly shown a lack of understanding, or at least a very limited understanding, of the subject of nationalism, as they have assumed that all forms of nationalism must always be along an ethnic, racial, or otherwise discriminatory line. Clearly the proposition has never heard of civic nationalism, which derives its legitimacy from a voluntary citizenry with no distinctions made in ethnicity at all. Credited to Jacques Rousseau's social contract, it extols the traditions of classical liberalism and rationalism, which empowers the individual, and thus places upon the individual the responsibility for their own actions. The proposition has not considered liberal nationalism, which is specifically founded on the principles of being a non-xenophobic form of nationalism, with an emphasis on freedom, tolerance, equality, and individual rights, which is very reminiscent of the universalism that we were just talking about. Furthering on Merriam-Webster's definition of xenophobia, we can put forward that its fundamental components are, in abstract, ignorance, fear and hate, as you said, and a view of supremacy. The forms of nationalism I just mentioned, which is just the two, I have mentioned that these extol virtues which combat all of these concepts. They promote reason and rationalism to combat ignorance. They provide collective security through a fair judiciary and security forces. Their fundamental principles of tolerance and understanding render the vulnerable narcissism of xenophobia to be a pointless exercise. And indeed, their emphasis on individual agency distances themselves from the culpability of ideas that run contrary to the nationalism's principles. Thus, I feel completely justified in stating that, for even the couple of forms of nationalism that I've mentioned, the inherent requirements of xenophobia are tackled in their core principles and processes, and thus cannot be held responsible for any individual instance of xenophobia. That is the responsibility of the individual and not of the state. The state, in these circumstances, answers to the individual and is determined by the individuals. It is clear to me that the motive of this motion is to criticise all forms of nationalism as being somehow responsible for xenophobia, in some sense. I have to say, I look forward to seeing the proposition's attempt to demonstrate how every conceivable instance of nationalism is doomed to xenophobia, though I believe that the examples I presented, of which my fellow members of the opposition will develop, are more than sufficient to put this motion to rest. For all the proposition's bluster, I've yet to hear any credible alternative to nationalism, to give any semblance of credence to their criticisms. For all the extreme examples that they could trot out in terms of ethnic nationalism, for instance, the fact remains that a Venn diagram is not a symbol of equivalence.
On that point,
Go ahead.
would you deny that? Excuse me. Would you deny that every single state who is adherent to civic nationalism has never declared war or carried out subjugation of other peoples? I would think of France in the 1960s going to Algeria trying to suppress them, even Britain going much further back. These countries which supposedly are peaceful all actually still on that basis of supremacy are doing these things.
I would disagree with that because their forms of nationalism are quite different from civic nationalism, particularly in Britain's interest, because it is in fact a monarchy. So no, it does not extol those virtues by the nature of their actions. They have contradicted that. Discussing how some specific forms of ethnic nationalism lend themselves to xenophobia is one thing, but to say that as an excuse to paint the entirety of nationalism as the same is a gross ignorance on par with xenophobia itself. To be honest, I'm of a mind that if you can say something in 5 minutes, that you can. There's no point spending 7 minutes to say something you said in 5 minutes. So on that, I'll just end it here. For the reasons I've outlined, I demand that the House reject this motion. Thank you.
Continue the case for the proposition, Mr. Kirakan.
I'm too excited tonight, guys. Too excited. Okay. Good evening, President, Secretary, and all members of the House. I'm going to talk about my favourite thing, nationalism. I'm going to start off with a bit of rebuttal, and then I'm going to talk about how the origins of how nationalism leads to xenophobia. First, civic nationalism, liberal nationalism, they all rise up alongside the nation state, as every single type of nationalism does. And as I will go on to show, territoriality has undoubtedly resulted in inherent xenophobia in nationalism. But I'm going to get on to that later. First, I would like to describe to you a party, a political party. One, people close ranks behind a strong leader. Two, there is strong in-group solidarity because they are fighting a good fight together. Three, rigid conformity to group norms, which means that anyone who doesn't believe in what they all believe is an outsider. No, not you, Ryan. Four, rejection of outsiders. Five, they believe that a certain type of people belong in a certain type of territory. Would you call this party a party of nationalists or xenophobes?
On that point, Bob?
Ah, yes, well.
I suppose the DUP.
I would agree, but
I don't think there's anyone serious within any nationalist party, certainly not on this island, that would advocate moving people, actually literally moving people who don't agree with them elsewhere.
Well, you said that's not what I said. I said they believe a certain type of people believe in a certain type of territory. But that's a trick question because nationalism leads into xenophobia. This might sound right to you because sure you've seen the xenophobic attitude of extreme nationalists. You can't deny that. Just look at the Muslim ban in the US with its America First precedent, which bans certain people from certain nations from entering the US, just because they were from those nations, the ones that aren't like us. You might say yes, but that doesn't apply to all nationalism, surely. My point is yes, all nationalism. Nationalism and xenophobia have gone hand in hand since the dawn of territoriality. Since we started settling in places and calling it our own, we have had a fear of people who are not from where we are. Look at one of the most famous parables in the Bible, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Shut up, Brian. The parable starts off with a question. Who is my neighbour? And as the story goes, a traveller is beaten and left to die on the side of the road. Two men from his own country pass by, and both of them turn away and do not help him. Then a Samaritan passes by. And now, Judea and Samaria hated each other, but the Samaritan stopped and helped the traveller. The Good Samaritan, because the traveller did not expect there to be a good Samaritan. But the point is, that countries are not supposed to divide us and make us fear each other. The point is that every person is your neighbour, that it is ridiculous to think that just because someone was born in a different place from you, that you should fear and hate them. But it wasn't until the French Revolution, the incident that set the world on fire, that nationalism became what it is today. The birth of nation-states and the rise of nationalism along them has defined the past 2 centuries. And let me go back to that concept of territoriality. The world is carved up into nation-states, no Brian. And doing this has divided humanity in the worst way it could ever possibly do. What could... Oh yeah, sure.
Well, I would like to bring your attention that the natural world is also divided into territories, with each animal group having its own territory to hunt in and eat in. And it's only natural that we being animals would follow the example of our ancestors.
Oh yes, but that does not mean that we should fear and hate people who aren't from where we are. That's not what we should be doing. It doesn't matter if people live in a different place from us. But what could possibly be more xenophobic than reconstructing the world so that if you do not belong to a nation state, or if you do not belong to the right nation state, you do not have access to human rights. Because that is the ultimate act of xenophobia. Because of how the nation state developed, access to human rights a person can achieve is dependent on their access to national territory, on their access to citizenship of a nation state. Nationalism has made human rights dependent not on being human, but on being a citizen of a nation state. And it has to be of the right nation state. Just look at your passports. What your passport is a statement that the nation you are from believes that you are a person who can be allowed to travel safely over borders. And if there is a ban, just like the Muslim ban Trump placed, on people from certain nations, it means that the nation you're trying to get access into does not have faith in the ability of the nation you're from to check your background. What could be more xenophobic than that? That you believe that you're just because you're from this certain place that you should be discarded and refused and not allowed to enter a safe place. Now, I've got 1 minute left, but let's move on to the most xenophobic crime of all. Nationalism has led xenophobia to every place that is not like yours, to every outsider. So we have to talk about the ultimate outsiders, the stateless, the people who lack access to human rights that is dependent on being a citizen of a nation state, people in immigration detention. It cannot be denied that immigration detention is horrific. Just go look at the North release last August, or for God's sake, Google it. But the abuse of human rights that happens in these places happens because in practice, these people do not have access to human rights. The state they're trying to enter doesn't want them, there is no state that will take them back. There's no one who will speak up and defend their rights. All because of nationalism. As Hannah Arendt said, the rights of man, supposedly unalienable, proved to be unenforceable. Because the world was carved up into nation states, because of the rise of nationalism alongside nation states, and how it leads to xenophobia, because xenophobia leads to abuse of human rights. All nationalism leads to xenophobia. It is something that simply cannot be denied. I'm trying to say that the sky is not blue. So please vote for the proposition, because all nationalism leads to xenophobia, and the only way to change that is by changing the system of nation states. Thank you.
And to continue the case for the opposition, I welcome to the floor a maiden speaker in this chamber, Mr. Conor McNamara.
It's intimidating up here. Yes, thank you. This is my maiden speech. I'm sick as a dog while doing it. So like ramble or projectile vomit, I'm sorry, but given the opposition's points, that might be a justified response. Proposition seems to be labouring under the delusion that nationalism has no positive forms at all and is somehow synonymous with identity politics. It's just not the case. Ms. Dixon, earlier on her points, was equating difference with inferiority, and when you get to that down the road, we'll knock it flat. Just working up the points laid out by Ryan, I'm going to expand upon civic nationalism, which practically by its definition precludes any type of xenophobia. For the benefit of both sides, I'm going to open with the standard academic definition. If anyone wants to ask me what the source is, that's fine. Civic nationalism essentially fosters the idea of developing a prosperous national life that is not contingent on closure or isolation, but rather on the development of transnational ties, surviving to allay any ethnocentric or xenophobic aspects of nationalism. Now, what does all that mean? Well, let's start with Phil answer. I'd say, look, the people around you were all products of this sort of civic-minded, non-xenophobic nationalism. How we define ourselves ethnically is irrelevant. So be we British, Irish, Northern Irish, and all that. That ethnic identity does not preclude what we value as our civic values-based national identity, which comes first and foremost. In many ways, the society itself is a free and open discussion forum, actually is an extension of this sort of civic nationalism. Yes, Richie.
You're talking about civic nationalism as if it hasn't got the word nationalism implied in it. You can't separate the two. I mean, it is a form of nationalism, but it has a lot of the inherent xenophobic qualities of nationalism is still implied within civic nationalism. Not to the same extent, but they are still there.
Civic nationalism is different from, say, ethno-nationalism. Ethno-nationalism is almost by its definition exclusionary. Civic nationalism is voluntary, it's values-based, you opt into it. Not just the UK, but the United States is founded on this principle. They're essentially, most of the Western world is founded on this principle as a social experiment. You opt in as a values-based, world-embracing, values-based rather than exclusionary nationalism. Any student of history, this ties back into Ms. Dixon's point, when she brought up France in the 1960s of British colonialism, acting as if nationalism hasn't developed at all over the years. This wasn't always the case. We used to be ethno-nationalist based, and obviously the result of that has been some of the worst wars of human history. The product of the modern age has been that we evolved nationalism. Nationalism has changed. We now adopt a civic, values-based nationalism that has nothing to do with exclusionary, it's inclusionary. You opt into it.
On that point,
Yes, Mr. Spratt.
Oh, actually, he got his hand up.
Okay, sorry.
So he's saying that anybody... So he's saying anybody who shares the same values as a country is then just able to opt in to citizenship of that country? Because that's not how it works.
No, my point is that you can opt into it. You're not excluded by it. Say, for example, if I want to become an American citizen, if I attain citizenship, that citizenship defines me because I adopt the same value system as, say, the United States. I'm not sequestered by my race or my religion, which used to be the case. It's an inclusionary style of nationalism. Just going to check the time. Now, regarding history, because I wanted to bring up this point, Ms. Campbell ties territory to nationalism. This totally ignores pan-nationalism. Things like human rights, which she mentioned near there at the end of her points. If you look at the East Cape Shore, these are international value systems that we adopt into our national identities and value systems. So you can't be exclusionary. They're universal rights that we adopt into. We achieved this. I was going to quote John Stuart Mill's ties to the likes of civic nationalism, but I'm quickly running out of time. We achieved this sort of non-xenophobic nationalism by grounding ourselves on individual rights, which Ryan hit upon, that allow for cultural distinctiveness. Citizenry, not race or religion, is your membership card. That is not exclusionary, that is not xenophobic. Xenophobes and racists do exist, but they are not a monolith and they do not represent the nation as a whole. As you can see, under the sort of civic nationalism that we have in the Western world, we accommodate cultures.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
I mean, what kind of rose-tinted world are you living in?
A civic world, sir.
A civic world.
Sir, if you walk down the street of any major city, you will find a Chinatown, you will find a Little Italy, you will find all these other distinct cultures coexisting together because we adopt into an overarching type of nationalism that doesn't exclude us. Yes, Ms. Gass.
And as you walk down that
There's
street,
no bargaining. You're just following up on this.
Okay, I'll wrap up. I was to say, in conclusion, before I pass out, in conclusion, stay in school, eat your vegetables, and reject this stupid notion because it's completely ignoring types of nationalism that are almost by their definition non-xenophobic. Thank you.
Could I just embarrass Mr. Conor McMahon again by having another round of applause for him? The case for the proposition, a regular of this institution, Mr. Ritchie.
Regular of this institution. Thank you, Mr. President, and a big thanks to everyone in attendance tonight. First, a rebuttal to a few things that were said, particularly Ryan's first point, claiming that we have to just argue that every single form of nationalism is bad. That's not what we have to argue. We don't have to argue that. What we argue is that nationalism is inherently xenophobic. That's what we have to argue, and that's what I believe we can argue, and we will argue. So. First, I would also like to explain why I am on the side of the debate tonight, despite being an Irish nationalist. Essentially, I believe you can support national self-determination without being a nationalist. And I also don't, there's an idea that Irish nationalism is this fluffy sort of nationalism that isn't really nationalism. Ireland doesn't have a far-right party, doesn't have. We do have the right provision. We do have a lot of things that you can point at as being xenophobic. So we're not void of that at all. Another reason I'm proposing the motion is that this house believes that all nationalism leads to xenophobia. Is because I am a cosmopolitan in the sense that what matters is human beings, and this is inherently the opposite of the definition of nationalism. Cosmopolitanism is the opposite of nationalism. Go ahead.
Not to say you take that view because you are a nationalist, specifically an Irish nationalist, fitting with the tradition of what Conor Thomas Davis.
I said a nationalist. Why would I take that? Why would I take that view? Oh, because Irish nationalism is this. Well, as I said. It's not. I mean, we still have elements of the Irish psyche which is inherently xenophobic. There's no denying that. As much as we might want to dip our head in the sand and pretend that it doesn't exist. It does. So, okay, where was it? I believe nationalism presupposes a commitment to national identity and a special and unique pride in that national identity. I am opposed to this idea because as a human being, I have a common humanity with every other human being everywhere in the world. For me, the problem is too much nationalism and not enough acknowledgement of our common humanity. If there was an acknowledgement of this, I believe we would be living in a much more peaceful and just world, and there would be much less xenophobia. Because we would recognise that people beyond our own borders are our brothers and sisters. We would not be obsessed with our nations and our national identity. We would look to the common humanity of all the people of the world.
On that point, sir?
Yeah.
It's very easy to say that. It's very easy to say that if everyone in the world suddenly changed their opinion, it would be a much better place. But the fact is, people do have very strong national ties. Like you can see by very, very quickly, compassion fatigue sets into what happens in Africa. What the atrocities that are committed there that don't make the news here is, it's astonishing. Like people just do care naturally more about the people in their own country, for right or wrong. It's very difficult to change that.
It's especially very dangerous to change that whenever you consider your flag greater than their flag, whenever you consider their history more wrong than your history. All these ideas of nationalism compound that idea and are responsible, if not entirely, for the reason why we don't care about Africa, why we don't care about a bomb in Turkey or whatever, in the same way we would France or the UK or Ireland, because we identify more, and it's ingrained in our national psyche to identify more with certain countries. No, I must get on, obviously. So, nationalism is largely a 20th century creation, and it was found to be useful for leaders in a post-colonial world to unite and galvanise its electorate. Nationalism offers nothing to humanity, and pride in it is senseless. Your national allegiance is based upon an accident of birth, and is even more ridiculous when you consider that borders, being accident of history, also determines your nationality. Now, but as the opposition would obviously point out, this debate is not about whether nationalism is stupid or not. It's not about whether some nationalism leads to xenophobia. It's about whether all nationalism leads to xenophobia. Now I'm going to explain why nationalism is inherently xenophobic. Nationalism, by its definition, makes it hard for outsiders to integrate. Because even when you take nationalism in its most moderate form, this implies that there are a set of values which you cannot deviate from if you want to be truly a member of a certain nation. This contributes to the sort of narratives we hear, such as, if they want to come to my country, they have to live by our rules. And if they don't like our country, they can get the F out. Very conscious of the port thing.
On that point.
No, I must go on. These attitudes are absolutely inspired by nationalism. You just have to look at the name of groups like the EPL, English Defence League, the UDA, Ulster Defence Association, to see how much defending a certain ideology is important to those who espouse the xenophobic ideals. Because implied within nationalism, even in its most moderate form, is the idea that you are a patriot for your country. So by definition, you set yourself against others from other countries. You also set yourself against ideas synonymous with other countries and regions, all of which leads to xenophobia. You create an us versus them division. This also creates a propensity for conflict, which again encourages xenophobia. Nationalism implies a degree of relative superiority and makes cooperation in an international arena quite difficult when you view your country as having a right to be at the top of the pecking order. And this makes it very difficult to cooperate with other powers. It causes us to be soldiers, as what the British tabloids love to call our boys, rather than seeing them as fallible soldiers, which are always engaged in something which is always a necessary evil, and who can at times engage in immoral and illegal acts that should be condoned and which they should be persecuted for. All of this also makes it difficult to reconcile after conflict and move forward. The opposition this evening have suggested several reasons why nationalism can be seen as a good thing. But I say that anything anti-xenophobic that has been done in the name of nationalism, I can assure you it is because on that occasion the stronger and more rational concept of a common humanity has won out over nationalism. So I leave you with the words of Albert Einstein: nationalism is an infantile disease, and I plead with you this evening to do what I do and confine your inane nationalist tendencies to relatively harmful pursuits such as supporting football teams. And please support these teams.
Based on the opposition and therefore our debate this evening, Mr. Finbar.
Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, 3 points of rebuttal, or points of rebuttal. Firstly, to Mrs. Dixon. I am also a citizen of the world because last time I checked, the Republic of Ireland was not on Jupiter. The root of the word nationalism is nation, and therefore surely it is defined based on the idea of the collective self rather than the other. Anywhere outside of Belfast, where the others all live cheek by jowl, that is true. In most places, nationalism means more a love of home, and you do not need to hate someone else's home to love your own. Travel is a thing. You can love the songs and stories you were brought up with. You can gaze out at the Mourne Mountains and just feel this serene sense of peace. But that does not mean you don't have any kind of interest in going and say Russia or somewhere. Go ahead.
On that point.
Just about on time. Look at that.
Would you deny the difference that exists between patriotism and nationalism? Nationalism is the political desire to project your values and your cultural values, and patriotism is the pure love of your home and where you're from, without reference to the other.
In fact, I think what you've been talking about tonight has been more patriotism than nationalism. For a start, does anyone really want to see uber centralised powers in political union? Don't say that there. Oh, sorry, I forgot Christmas here. You bloody lovesy, you. It's terrible. America first effectively means America only. Can you really expect to find a sophisticated and well-rounded ideology from people with more guns than books? You can't blame nationalism for America being thick and inequality at large existing. Then to Mr. Gallagher, the xenophobia behind our nationalism obviously does exist, but it is not the majority of it, and it does not suit the entire history of it. It evolved, yes, as opposed to British Union, but not to the British themselves. And anyone such as John Redmond or Arthur Griffith would agree with me on that. Sir Henry Wilson was as much an Irishman as was Michael Collins. And also, in answer to a couple of points that a few of you have made, who mentioned pride? You don't need to take pride in your religion to be a nationalist. You could really just be happy about it. You don't need to take pride in your accident of birth. You can just be happy about it. And comfortable. Because that's effectively what patriotism and nationalism et al. Mean. It's where you feel comfortable.
On that point.
You're a Catholic, go away. The section of this motion is basically of the kind that I would expect to find in an Observer article that I would then scorn into my tea at, rather than any kind of serious academic literature. It reminds me of that quote that you've probably all seen passed around the internet at various points from noted American commentator, former presidential candidate, and suspected chicken molester, Pat Buchanan, who said that feminism will lead leave women to leave their husbands, become witches, and take up lesbianism. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. The point is that much like the Klan proposition seems to have this defined an entire ideology by the worst extremities of it. Whereas intersectionality exists, and it is not a vice, it is something that should be appreciated. Just as feminism is defined and practiced differently from the Falls Women's Centre in Belfast in the West to Action Now in India. It is similarly irresponsible to paint with a broad brush everyone from John Q to Marie Le Pen. A lot of xenophobes may be nationalists, but that does not mean that all nationalists are xenophobes. Ideologies are broad churches, and they are defined differently across localities, according to the mind that they're being born from. There's a far better argument to link xenophobia to thick people, to social class, people with a lack of access to education, and a lack of opportunity for travel. I'm not being elitist there, I think that's a bad thing, and everyone should have those kind of opportunities. But that's where these kind of things are born from. So they are correlated, but correlation does not equal causation. You don't need to hate Poland to love Ireland. And furthermore, speaking again from the perspective of Irish nationalism, it has been far more cosmopolitan than it has not. And people like Daniel O'Connell, who declared himself a friend of liberty in every clime, class and colour, who travelled the world arguing for the abolition of slavery, for women's emancipation and for Jewish emancipation, who influenced Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, from Thomas Davis, who believed that the only prerequisite to being a member of the Irish nation was simply allowing yourself to be one. If you like the sound of barrel, then you're in. And it is quite an impressive instrument, by the way. I think it's just a drum. There's a whole thing that goes on there. We need to like pour Guinness into it and stuff. It's the only instance we need water. And then John Hume. Nice. All global-minded nationalists whose legacy and influence are not nearly appreciated. The growing contemporary trend that we see, which is purported by the likes of Nigel Farage and Theresa May, and that partially trained bonobo who has suddenly risen to prominence in the United States, should not in any way be allowed to overtake and come to define the legacy of those decent men and women across centuries and across nations, who only want to see their country take its place among the nations of the world. Because after all, nation states are what form the international communities that you have talked about. And that is done.
Now, we move on to questions from the floor. So if anyone has questions for the proposition.
I have a question. Could I just have some more wine?
Mr. Jeremy.
First, I wanted to just ask a question about the distinction between patriotism and nationalism.
We'll have to mix my drinks.
And then I wanted to move on to a question about the necessity of some core values to having a functioning society. So I thought the distinction that was a little bit misconstrued. In essence, I understand that there's perhaps a common sense. There's a common sense notion that there may be a pure patriotism, a pure love of country that is separate from sort of politicization of that kind of love. But really, I think it would be more accurate to represent this kind of thing as a spectrum. And I was wondering if you have any clear reason for not identifying this kind of thing as a spectrum, from patriotism that might be very, very basic, a love of a football team, to the politicization of that kind of love. The most patriotic people might have been in history nationalists, for better or for worse. And secondly, I want to discuss this notion of politicizing values and whether that's inherently a bad thing. And having this idea of a core national identity, so we're talking so long. But because essentially every society to function, I would say, has to have some intersection of values. And even if we so perhaps we can't get away from that. We can't get away from the need for something that makes a country what it is. And so I just would like to hear your thoughts.
I think I was quite clear on the difference that I would draw between patriotism and nationalism. When did you last hear a patriot say, you know what would be a great idea, let's go and rig an election in Venezuela because we can? At what point do they say, oh, we want to impose our values across the whole world? Con, I would reply to your point, saying that civic nationalism precludes xenophobia. Are you nuts? Have you looked at America recently? Anyone and everyone can become a member of the United States, not so much a member perhaps. But the history of the United States the last 150 years has been, let's go and impose our values, let's go and impose civic values of freedom, liberty, universalism, equality. In what name, in my God's name? It's nuts. Excuse me. Patriotism is a pure love, nationalism is a political will. Our country is better than your country, our fatherland is better than your one. We are France. So for example, under Napoleon, France's idea of civilization must be exported to the rest of the world because this is the way, this is the political way, the truth, whatever you want to call it. You see how this is. You know, you can have a patriot who genuinely loves their country, who genuinely wants to sell their country, build their country, go back to their country, go back to Syria, go back to Morocco, build their country and make it great from within. Whereas a nationalist wants to go to other countries and say, you should be just like us and you should be subservient to us, and that is the difference. It is a political agenda, whereas patriotism is pure love.
Getting confused between imperialism and nationalism. Imperialism and nationalism. And in that regard, it seems that unionism is far more worthy of describing than nationalism. Because the for a start, it depends on the union. Not just want a union with someone else. the idea of the British Empire, which was based upon Pax Britannica, going to other countries and. Can I tell you? Don't be sign anything. They're going to other countries and civilizing the natives, which we can still see today with the likes of the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. We're going to go ahead and bring democracy to the Middle East. You know, we never asked the Middle East if it wants democracy. We never considered if it's suited to democracy. You know, a system of government which came about here quite differently over about 200 years. Whereas nationalism is something that patriotism is really part and parcel of. Really. You're talking about satsumas and tangerines as entirely different things. I can taste the difference. I see the irony of picking an orange. But it's something that grows out of the country and then recognises that there are problems that are unique to that country and the solutions can best be found within the country by the people who know about the problems. That does not mean that there's nothing to be found outside of the world. That does not mean that we're going to build a wall all around ourselves. We don't need to do that. We have an ocean.
And that will take a question from the opposition.
No ports, no ports, no Belfast Harbour does not exist.
Wait.
Thank you. Mr. President, it can be quite difficult debates such as these to find people who are suitable authority on issues as hard to define as nationalism. The one I would turn to is George Orwell, with a great essay on nationalism, which I recommend everyone to read, mainly because it's written by George Orwell. It's brilliant. In that, he defined nationalism in a number of ways, but mainly the habit, I'm going to go here because I can step better than I can, the habit of identifying oneself with a single nation or unit and placing it beyond good or evil and recognising no other duty than advancing its interests. And then he separated from patriotism by saying that patriotism is defensive in nature, whereas nationalism is inseparable from the desire for power, and the abiding purpose of a nationalist is for more power and prestige for their chosen nation. I suppose, would the opposition accept that definition, and if not, why not?
Well, actually, this touches also on the point Jeremy's point, actually, in terms of the spectrum. You know what I mean? That's one man's definition of nationalism, and another man may have a different definition. You know what I mean? It's about understanding these complexities and nuance. You know what I mean? It's not a zero-sum game. You know what I mean? That's the end of the story, really. You can't just say that, well, there's this instance of nationalism and this instance of nationalism, therefore all nationalism is like these instances of nationalism. You know, it blows my mind to think that someone could stand up without even mentioning multiple forms of nationalism, just mentioning nationalism, even as you did, for instance, saying it's a specific territory, whereas it completely ignores pan-nationalism, which is a nationalism which is considered in terms of a type of people. You know what I mean? Even then, that would debunk what you said. You know what I mean? It's about understanding the nuance and complexity and the sophisticated nature of these groups. You know what I mean? Because human society, human groups are complex. You know, you can't just boil them down to one thing or another, and that's what this motion does. It says all nationalism leads to xenophobia. A implies B. We have presented forms of nationalism. In fact, it was rather easy, a 2-minute Google search. We bring up forms of nationalism which do not lead, which do not preclude xenophobia. They just don't. So B is false, and therefore A does not imply B. Therefore, the statement is false. It's a logical fallacy that we move on.
Okay, I don't know why your Google is different than my Google, but
what's the localization?
Okay, well, the Orwell essay one, I did read that earlier today, and he is absolutely right. I mean, there is a difference between nationalism and patriotism, and yeah, it is, as I said, and Albert Einstein said, what was the quote again? Nationalism is an infantile disease. It is putting nationhood and country above rationale, above morals. It is, and no matter either in the most moderate sense or the most extreme sense, you will find a range where it does, you know, ignore rationale and morality, and this leads to xenophobia, and that's it.
Oh, well, that's fine then. That's going to go on.
And that will take sort of abstaining points on the motion. As anyone has a question they'd like to address on both sides, they thought neither side really adequately covered enough. Otherwise, we'll move on to another case proposition, or question, sorry. Yes, Mr. Son.
If we didn't have nationalism, wouldn't we just sort of go back to a state where you just have smaller groups of people thinking they're better than others? You wouldn't have nations, you'd have tiny groups. So instead of having Germany thinking it's better than France, you'd have Bavaria thinking that it's better than Prussia.
Proposition.
Well, you know, commenting that and saying, like, what's wrong with decentralization? Really, it's a perfectly acceptable alternative to the nation state. And, you know, if we didn't have decentralization, we probably wouldn't have what we've done to the climate. We probably wouldn't have nuclear, you know, weapons. We probably wouldn't have the devastation that has occurred across the world in the entire history of humankind. So, like, your point about, like, if there were smaller communities, like, yes, that's a perfectly reasonable alternative to nation states.
Opposition?
Sure, I'll be the last. Yeah, it's a good point. Nationalism is inherently tied to our identity. The proposition that I'm throwing up is, again, communicating German's point, which I feel I just kind of flew away from addressed afterwards, that this thing is a spectrum. The point that Richie made earlier on kind of hits at what the opposition has been failing to grasp the whole time, treat it as if it's a zero-sum game. I think I'm going to pull the quote here, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'll paraphrase it. We talked about integration saying adopt our way of life or go home. You know, nationalism is like you were saying, if Germany wasn't here, we talk about just Prague and Czechoslovakia and all that. Nationally, you can have a national identity that is not how you define yourself. Every time you walk the street, every time you see a mosque or a synagogue or a cultural centre, that's evidence that you can have different identities that are not this black and white logic the propositions have been throwing up all night. Nationalism itself is just inherently part of human nature. We identify ourselves by certain values and traits, and that does not involve then excluding others just because they're different. I think we need to go back and readdress our terms.
Any questions from the opposition? Mr. Wynn?
I would like an elaboration. There was something about that was completely irrelevant, and that's thick people from work. I would like you to elaborate and help me to understand how thick people in any way, shape, or form of nationalism come into this.
There's loads of them.
Or is that phobia? Carry on. I need to know. How do thick people come into it?
Well, if you hate someone for no other reason but where they're from or what they look like, then you probably are stupid.
For you, it's a socioeconomic background.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's a lack of access to education and the quality of understanding. Well, not necessarily stupid in that case. That was the being glib. But again, you know, they're perfectly capable of understanding other people. They just haven't been given the opportunity. You know, but that is another issue. You know, it's not to do with nationalism, it's to do with inequality in the broader sphere.
The proposition can respond to that, but it was really a question for them, I guess. But
well, in defense of fun, I'm the one that said nationalism and disease. So.
You were talking about America.
In defense of fun, I'm like, sorry, you wanted to be.
Yeah.
Right?
You've already responded against the rules, but I don't care because it's near the end of the term.
I believe that individual self-actualization is the best cure and safeguard against nationalism. Once you focus on becoming an individual, you lose the need to be, I belong to this nation, but I have a sense of worth and I will fight for something. You know, you don't have to run off to the field of France to prove yourself as a man, as an English guy. You can say, no, I am myself, I am as I am, I'm not fit to box, and I refuse to live in boxes. Excuse me.
that's a small box.
And so I don't think it's necessarily education. I think it's ambition, I think it's individualism, I think it's knowing who you are.
Would that will just got one more round of questions, I think. So one last case. Question, the proposition. Mr. Black?
I am slightly concerned from this primary tautology and semantics here by saying that at the best level, Xenophobia is of course like a bad, evil love of country. But the way you're turning around saying patriotism is the good love of country, not that one's bad, but nationalism, oh no, by definition that's the bad love of country, and therefore by definition it is in line with Xenophobia and whatnot, and therefore the bad kind of country and stuff. I'm just curious to see whether or not you would agree with my characterization of the arguments, and if you disagree, convince me that that's not what you've been doing. If you like, feel like you've just been saying, well, this is the bad kind, this is the bad kind, therefore they are equal and they need each other.
Absolutely disagree. Well, we've said time and time again that let's like George Orwell. He's always a good person to throw around, right? So, defence of homeland, imposition of homeland, right? How many? I don't know how to rehash this. Finn has been tarring these two concepts with the same brush. Oh, patriotism, nationalism, all basically the same thing. We identify with a certain kind of, history, ethnicity, so on, etc. But there is a clearly different agenda. Nationalism is an ideology. We are inherently better people. We have something to offer the world. We would be doing a disservice to the world if we didn't go around the world telling them exactly how to live their lives. You see it throughout history. This is the British coming over here, Americans going into South America, France going to the Middle East, whatever it is. Patriotism is a pure and simple love of your country. As you are, you feel no need to go beyond your borders. You love your country so much. You're like, I will serve my country. I will be happy in my country. I feel no. If someone's coming to be attracted by it, super. Nationalism, I will impose at any cost. This is the right thing to do, black and white.
Can I clarify just a little thing from my answer?
No.
My clarification.
Absolutely. Opposition?
Once again.
Hang on a second.
What? Are you saying you want to speak?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Quickly, just before that last one, you talked about individualism. But a nation is made up of individuals. And the world you talked about is made up of individual nations. To therefore declare yourself a citizen of the world is to steamroll over, tar with the same brush, to use your own phrase, every single individual nation and their cultures that have developed independent of each other. Rather like when, Americans, talk about going to Europe. Where are you going, Ballina or Barcelona? There's a difference. If you're not specific, you're going to be disappointed. Sorry? You can go.
You say it. Standing up. What is this?
Briefly, please, Mr. Rogers.
Egalitarian.
Should I give them a prize or what?
Oh,
the
Ryan, go on.
Okay, I suppose you can't have two responders for that's the only reason I'm dealing with that. I breach the rules, so my apologies. But okay, if I may point out something that needs to be pointed out, it's the fact that you're confusing nationalism and imperialism. Imperialism is the sense of supremacy. It's a type of nationalism. It's an extent of nationalism. It is nationalism taken to what I would have not called a vulnerable narcissism. It's this idea that, you know what, we think we're better than them, they're less than us, and so we, by enslaving them or taking them over or robbing them of their rights, are in fact improving their lives. It is a way of justifying horrible acts. That's imperialism. That's not nationalism as a whole, and I think conflating that is misleading.
Question the opposition, I think. Inspired up to? Yeah? One last question, the opposition then? Let's just grab.
So, one of the things that came up, that the examples brought up of pan-nationalism as a potentially positive and somehow non-xenophobic.
No.
You did. And I found that quite a curious example to bring up, given some of the very negative consequences that pan-nationalism resulted in the early 20th century regarding the German state in Austria, which was to the exclusion, of course, of non-German peoples in those nations. We have to say that regardless of whatever form of nationalism that is, it all figures around one set of core principles. And that set of core principles is therefore exclusionary to those who don't share that, regardless whether it's civic, pan, whatever.
Okay. If I make a point then on pan-nationalism, it was merely to undermine her definition of nationalism, which is that nationalism is tied to borders, which pan-nationalism is not. So that was merely to undermine her specific definition. It's not to make a point that pan-nationalism is somehow a positive thing. That was never our argument. But yeah, if I may clarify, what was the last point again?
No, go back. No,
Right, okay.
It was essentially, we're forgetting about it because I've been working in this area, that it is the idea that regardless of whatever basis it is upon some form of basis in terms of characteristic, and that is exclusionary to those who do not share those principles.
So if those core principles and core characteristics are one of freedom, tolerance, respect, if they are ones of a shared... Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, if they're positive principles, is that not good? If we're excluding negative principles, is that not good exclusion? I wouldn't consider excluding things such as, for instance, the enslavement of women to be xenophobia. I would say that would be common sense. You know what I mean? It's about understanding that. Also, validation of one's own nationalism does not require external factors. It's about taking pride in your own shared identity, and not even necessarily pride. It's merely a sense of belonging. So, I mean, honestly, that's my response. Just take it or leave it.
I have to say, Chris, I agree entirely with everything that you said. On pan-nationalism. The clues in the name have a wee hint. Nationalism. Pan-nationalism, nationalism. The entire point that pan-nationalism makes is that you're just redefining the borders, which are imaginary and made up. You're just creating a larger one. Two nations become one nation state. And as whatever you were saying there, like if you find freedom, liberty, freeing women, that's still imposing your own values on other people who are living in a different place from yours. And you don't have a right to fear and take. You don't have a right to come in and say, no, the way you're doing this is wrong and we want you to be just like us because we hate the way you are. Because that's nationalism. That is nationalism. Anyway, destroying nation states 2017.
And on that note, we move to our voting this evening. So we'll go for our first vote, which is obviously based on your prior opinion before you heard the speech today tonight. So if you were in favour of the motion before you heard the speeches made tonight, please raise your hand for membership and say aye. Aye. Not very many. And if you were against the motion before you entered the room this evening and heard the arguments, say, raise your hands and say nay. 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 And if you didn't really have an opinion before you entered the room this evening, you're undecided, please raise your hands and say nay.
Aye, go ahead. Why you couldn't have it over there?
Right, and this is the vote based on speaker ability, not speaker opinion. That would be a little bit harsh. So if you thought the proposition stated your case sufficiently tonight and you think their case won, please raise your hand and say aye. Well, you can't vote for yourself.
You can't, you shouldn't.
Yeah, you should. We need to make a
nationalist.
We need to make a law where you can vote for yourself.
It isn't. It's not.
And if you thought opposition argued their case effectively and rebutted the proposition, please raise your hands and say aye.
Yeah.
Tim, you're not going to vote for yourself?
No, separately.
And if you thought both sides argued both equally effectively or equally rubbish, please raise your hands and met.
And
Hands nice and like this, folks.
Nothing like how we do it.
Well, sure, moving on.
One more time for the extensions there, folks. Hands nice and high.
It just right.
Take the set.
And the truly shocking turn of events, neither side has won. The House is decidedly of mixed opinion on this motion.
I don't think I've ever actually seen that happen.
So a round of applause for lukewarm opinions.